So before we actually get into today's video, I want to talk to you guys about Jerseyfifa.com, because as you can see, they have hooked me up with a load of fresh shirts for this year's World Cup. I've got the England home kit, the England away kit, and also a nice little retro shirt. And you can do exactly the same if you head to Jerseyfifa.com using the link in the description down below. They also do the same for club football as well. The latest home shirts, away shirts, but also some really nice retro kits. If you are interested, head to the link in the description down below and use code Jerseyfifa for a discount when you order. Now into the video. Hey guys, welcome back to the AJ Analysis channel, where again we are back with match coverage, and this time a really fascinating game between Manchester City and Tottenham Hotspur, which of course Manchester City went on to win 4-2 after coming from 2 goals down at half time. And it's a really enjoyable game, as you can imagine, when there's 6 goals, thoroughly entertaining. So we're just going to get straight into the tactics because, like I said, I really enjoyed this game. And actually what I'm going to do is start by talking about Spurs in possession, just something briefly, because I don't think this is something that too many other people will cover, because it wasn't a big ploy in the game that really ever led to anything. However, I think it's still a flaw in the City pressing system and a way that Spurs kind of exposed them. Now, when Spurs were trying to build up from the back, Ben Davies moved to left back, so we can see they were starting in a back 3, but it was still a back 3, but it was lopsided now with Ben Davies at left back, Emerson dropping in at right back, and then what we saw was that City were trying to press. Of course they were, and Haaland was splitting the 2 centre-backs. We saw Alvarez on Bentancur pressing high, Mahrez kind of in between Dyer and Davies, Grealish doing the same on the other side, Gundogan squeezing up on Højbjerg, with then basically in midfield Rodri is left to sweep up behind, right? So man for man in the midfield here with Gundogan and Alvarez, Rodri sweeping up behind them. However, the issue that City had was that Spurs were quite aggressive with their winger, or their wing back I should say, with Perisic on this side, pushing right up forward on Rico Lewis. What this meant was that Kulusevski and Son could then drop into these areas either side of Rodri. And like I said, this didn't lead to any massive chances in the game, only one which I can really recall. However, I do just think it's something that Spurs could have exposed a little bit more, because they did get these situations where Son could get the ball in this area, especially with Lloris able to chip the ball out to someone like Ben Davies. When Son was then dropping into these areas, and then Kane and Kulusevski were making runs, I just think it's something that Spurs could have taken greater advantage of. So that was kind of a little side note for the match. Now let's talk about some of the real big tactical ploys that we saw in this match. So the way that we have it set up here is a 4-2-3-1 versus a 3-4-3. But let's be honest, it wasn't really like that at all. Manchester City, of course, always changed their shape from their starting shape, and they shifted to a back 3, with Aki tucking from left back, Rico Lewis basically playing as a midfielder, with Rodri, Gundogan pushing further forward, and it creates this 3-2-5 for Manchester City, which we know they know and love. This meant that Spurs had to match that up by going to a back 5, so the wing backs were very deep. So it weren't a 3-4-3, it was a 3-2-5 up against a 5-2-3 essentially. And Spurs were quite passive initially in their approach to pressing. They were happy for City to have the ball one step forward, allowing City to build in this 3-2 shape. Son and Kulusevski would both drop right in, and Harry Kane was kind of alone in this area, not really being asked to engage in a press. However, just because Spurs were passive in their initial press, it doesn't mean they were playing park the bus football. This was a mid-block, and quite an aggressive one at that. Now, what Manchester City wanted to do was try and make this box in midfield, with Gundogan, Alvarez, Rodri and Lewis trying to overload the Spurs 2 midfielders. However, Spurs done a few things to try and stop this. One, they moved their wingers in Son and Kulusevski narrower, which kind of reduced the channels which the passes could be played through. But also we saw Ben Davies and Romero being really aggressive on Gundogan and Alvarez when they were getting the ball. And in the first half, City weren't dynamic enough to kind of then expose the spaces that this was leaving. So Spurs' approach was very good, kind of man for man in these areas, Bentancur and Højbjerg on Rodri and Lewis. Say if John Stones would step forward with the ball down the right hand side, Son would come out and engage him, and if Aki done the same on the left hand side, Kulusevski would go and engage him. And basically Spurs were aggressive man to man all over the pitch, and what it's done was that with City playing quite slowly, it then forced City to turn around and play backwards, and then Spurs would then use that as the trigger to continue their man-to-man approach and really go and squeeze nice and high. This is exactly what we can see here by using Once Video Analyzer Pro, which you guys can check out using the link in the description down below. Super affordable, really easy to use, and we're going to see some of the kind of benefits of having it here. We can see Spurs here in their man-to-man press. We've got Son on Stones, who is just behind me in this area here. We've got Kane on Akanji, Kulusevski on Aki, Bentancur on Rodri, and then Perisic squeezing in on Rico Lewis. This is what happens for the first goal. We can see that Spurs kind of were in their mid block and then gradually forced City back towards their own goal and then really went and pressed them. And this is of course where the first goal comes from, because Ederson plays just a silly pass into this area which was never really on with a player so tightly marking Rodri. And 1-0 Spurs, and it all came from their aggressive mid-block. Now, as we would expect, despite using an aggressive mid-block initially, there were still situations where Spurs would sit off. And I think it's because they were worried about the threat in behind the defence. And they were right to be worried about this threat in behind, but it was never actually really exposed. Haaland was constantly making runs off the back of Eric Dyer, and we know that's a bit of a mismatch in terms of speed and physicality, athleticism. Haaland is always going to win that battle. But City had this real refusal to go direct. Alvarez was also making similar runs as well, and if City had done this more in the first half, I think this would have been a much more comfortable game for them. But they had this refusal to hit the ball over the top, and I think I know why. It's because of Pep Guardiola. He wants control, which means having the ball, which means at times being a little bit safe in possession. But there were chances for City to hit the long ball in behind here, but Spurs never really faced that threat. Regardless, Spurs did still have phases in the game where they would drop deeper. And I think we expect that from City because they are so good on the ball that they kind of naturally progress the ball eventually, even if you use a good shape against them, because they do have excellent technicians. However, even in this shape, Spurs were still able to defend pretty well. Now again, the reason that Spurs were able to defend this well was because City weren't able to create overloads. Once again, we got this narrow midfield four from Spurs, but then what City like to do typically is they get this front five of Grealish, Gundogan, Haaland, Alvarez and Mahrez, usually up against a back four, which means they have numerical superiority. However, with Spurs also playing a back five, again it put them in this man-to-man system. And the thing with a man-to-man system is if you can win your individual battles, you're going to expose the opposition, right? Because you're taking a player out of the game and beating them. Manchester City just didn't do that in the first half. They weren't dynamic enough, they weren't quick enough, they weren't sharp enough in their play, which meant the Spurs defended these situations really well. As a result, we saw the likes of John Stones and Nathan Ake taking a bit more matters into their own hands a little bit and trying to step forward with the ball and progress the play out wide. But as we can see, what that is going to do is that as soon as City lose the ball in these areas, which they did on several occasions just because they weren't on it, we can see that this is going to lead to the counter-attack. And with Akanji now kind of isolated in the middle, it means that if he steps forward to engage the ball at any point, there's then this gaping gap in the middle with Stones and Ake desperately trying to track back and cover it. This is actually exactly what led to the second Spurs goal of the game. We can see Manchester City are pushing men forward here, and Spurs are going to hit them on a counter-attack. And as always with Spurs, it was quite a ruthless counter-attack. But what we can see is Rodri being caught higher up the pitch here than what I would ideally like. But then got Akanji, who is going to be dragged out into kind of engaging the ball. But then if we look at the two Manchester City players here, Stones and Ake, they now have so much ground to make up. And the problem with this is not only is there a lot of ground to make up, but look at the distance between the two of them. There is a lot of space here, meaning that if Harry Kane wants to, he now has a lot of room in which he can attack. And that's exactly what we saw. He makes his run in behind here, and Kulusevski does the same on the other side. And whilst the goal didn't literally come from a straight through ball, which opened up the defence, it all came because of this. Basically what happened is the ball gets scrambled, kind of recycled, Harry Kane wins a tackle, which leads to the goal. However, it all happens because of this counter-attacking shape, and basically Manchester City's inability and their lack of structure, basically, from a defensive point of view. This was disorganised. This was kind of chaotic from the Manchester City defence, and that is the last thing you want, and Spurs deserved to score the second goal. Now, of course, as we know, Spurs went into this 2-0 lead, but Manchester City actually won 4-2. But based on the first half, you wouldn't have seen that coming. So the question is, what did they change? And I'll be honest, it was almost a return to basics. It was be quicker on the ball rather than taking 4 touches to move the ball. Let's now take 2 or 3 touches to move the ball. It was sharper passing, more speed on the ball into feet, so it's easier to kind of take under control and turn, and also a little bit more direct at times. They were a bit happier to play the long switches out to Mahrez and out to Grealish. And then from here, again, just more direct with the way that they played. Grealish was now taking on Emerson down this side, and importantly down the other side, Mahrez was taking on Perisic. The other thing that City done quite well was they now created an overload. So I was talking in the first half about how it was 1 versus 1 everywhere, right? With City's front 5 matching Spurs' back 5. What we saw in the second half was Rico Lewis pushing forward a little bit more. And what it's done was now caused a problem basically for Perisic, because he was now 2 versus 1 in the situations where Son was a little bit slow getting back. So with Rico Lewis getting forward into these areas as well, City now essentially had a front 6 against a back 5, a 3-1-6 shape, which meant that now they could finally overload the Spurs defence. And like I said, Mahrez was more direct, Grealish was more direct, the whole team was more direct in general, and we're going to see some of these patterns for all 4 of the City goals. We're going to see City being more direct, we're going to see Rico Lewis getting forward, but also the wingers taking on more responsibility to actually just get at their man. 1 versus 1 duels are massive when it's a man-for-man system. If you win them, ultimately you tend to go on to win the game, and that is what happened in the second half. Like I said, we can see elements of all of this for all 4 goals. So this is City's first goal here, and what we can see is that they have still got this front 5 shape. Once again, matching up with the Spurs back 5. However, what they also have now is the fact that, if we highlight him here, Rico Lewis is now joining the attack. He is giving them that extra man, and basically what this does is it creates a 2 versus 1 for Perisic on this side, which means that Mahrez is now able to get the ball and be direct and go at him. So by pushing Rico Lewis a little bit further forward, City have now managed to overload this Spurs defence, and it caused problems in the second half. This is how the first goal happened. This led straight to the first goal, and it continued to happen throughout the half. If we look at City's second goal here, we can again see the front 6. There's one player just behind me off screen here, and then you've got Haaland. And City now have 6 attackers, with again Rico Lewis pushing much further forward to join the attack. What's going to happen here is Mahrez makes this lovely run in behind the defence. And Rodri plays an excellent ball basically through to him, but again it has come from Rico Lewis pushing forward, creating the overload. City now having a front 6, but also Rodri taking that risk on the ball to play the ball forward. City were just so much sharper. The other thing we were talking about was the Manchester City wingers being more direct, and that is exactly what we can see here from Riyad Mahrez. He is now taking players on. He had already beat Perisic. Where's Perisic? Let me just find him real quick. We had already beat Perisic further up here. And now he's going to take on Ben Davies. And this literally leads straight to the goal. Question marks over Lloris in goal. For me, he shouldn't be conceding it. But again, it comes from this change of approach for Manchester City. We can see Rico Lewis just out of shot here, pushing further forward, joining the attack. City having their 5 men forward, but importantly, Mahrez taking more responsibility, looking to get at his man. In a man versus man system, you have to be brave on the ball. And for me, that was ultimately the difference in the second half for Manchester City. And that is what inspired the comeback, basically. And then, of course, the 4th and final goal. What was the other thing we were talking about? City being more direct. We don't need to look at what Mahrez done for this move. This all comes from Ederson pumping a long ball over the top and setting Mahrez free. Compare that to what we saw in the first half, where he played the ball short and lost possession. City, like I said, they really did just go back to basics, and it was actually quite refreshing to see. And for me, it was that, along with the tactical change of pushing Rico Lewis further forward, which allowed Manchester City to complete the comeback and win this football match. As for Spurs, they should be really disappointed with their second half display. They weren't on it, they weren't winning their the first ball, the second ball, they weren't winning their duels all over the pitch, and Conte didn't really react enough for me either to kind of make a difference. We could see very early in the second half what was happening. Conte could have reacted, didn't really. A couple of mistakes from Hugo Lloris in goal. Not a good night for Spurs in the end, but for Pep Guardiola, I don't think he'll be at all impressed with what we saw in the first half. His play is too lethargic on the ball, basically. Second half, much sharper with that tactical change, putting Rico Lewis, who looks like a brilliant young player, further forward. Absolutely incredible, and Manchester City eventually deserved their 4-2 win. So yeah, that's all I've got to say for today's video. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it, and as always, I will see you in the next one.